You come in here and you think you're the big man. I understand you all too well. You end up seeing me looking over the dead. They talk to me, you see. If you give me that look again, I might be snatching your eye. Still, allow me to explain something to you. To me, the dead are sacred. Not the corpse, but the people. And that's what matters is people. When that body walks again, serving the higher purpose of Eva, you see her glory. You see him toil the soils, making sure that those that still breathe and walk under their own power, they find life a little easier. Grim, you say? You'd find it horrible that I end up here commanding the bones of your ancestors, so that they may serve their hair lineage and end up here showing great amount of respect. The person is long gone. They end up finding their way into the great ocean. What they left was legacy. The bones, just another part of that legacy, prepared to serve those who came after. We're going to talk about the first steps in immersion. The reason I want to end up bringing this up is your first bit when you come into a role playing game, you might be a little confused. I know that I certainly was. Because you're offered something like Pathfinder here, and the first thing you end up saying is, oh, you got halflings, you got elves, you got humans, you got half orcs, you got dwarves. Oh, and you got all these classes. So, when I end up building that half orc fighter, oh, he's primed and ready to go. Then you get into your first session, and you're waiting while the dungeon master is explaining to you that the mayor's daughter was kidnapped, and here's 100 gold pieces to split between the party, and you go in and rescue 5 few magic items, and you wonder why it is that you're just sitting there waiting, waiting to roll dice, and it can trick you. You start rolling dice. It's like, yes, I'm finally playing. Holy shit! I ended up doing a full 12 damage. 12 damage. Holy shit! Drop that skeleton on the first go. And then you end up doing this for maybe 2 or 3 days, and then go, maybe this isn't for me. I'm bored. I'm waiting my turn. This is the biggest problem and the first impression most people end up getting. If you've ended up spending any time in online games, you've probably rolled into these games. You probably rolled 20. Well, let's bring it back down to basics. The first bit about immersion. Now, this isn't for dungeon masters specifically or players. This is about you. The first piece of advice I'm going to give you is make personalities, not character sheets. This doesn't have to be a 30-page backstory. I've run into probably over 100 players who have this rich, deep backstory, and it never comes up. Never really shows in the character. It's not one of those things that ever really shows, and because of that, it feels like a wasted effort. Just focus on who they are. Are they the kind of person who likes to relax? Or are they the kind of person who despises the person who just sits there chewing a stem of wheat while everyone else is working their way in the fields. Maybe he's a bit of a coward or a trickster. Maybe he's has a particular bias against particular races or peoples. Maybe he prides himself on martial prowess. When he's like that, I expect him at the crack of dawn when everybody else is still waking up, before breakfast has been served, working on sword stances, practicing parry, thrust. He's working on footwork. This is his life. This is his dedication. Maybe the priest says a prayer. Your cleric better be showing him some point of faith. If you don't hear your cleric proselytize at least once to you, there might be an issue, especially if you don't follow their God. Still, start with this personality. The whole point of the role-playing game is to be someone you're not. And just swinging an axe isn't what made Conan interesting. So start with who they are. After all, when Conan ended up saying to Crom that he has no tongue for prayer, that tells us a lot of who he is. Second thing, when you have this base personality, don't be afraid to make something personal. Okay? If at any point you are a martial prowess character, you're, say, one of the greatest fencers in the Five Kingdoms, or maybe you are a sculptor who got drafted into the wrong adventure. Thought he'd going a little Bilbo on you. Well, when something happens that your character can interpret, make it personal. Your character relays who they are by their actions and how they say things and what they say. So feel free to react to something. If your great swordsman has a goblin who just manages to cut into him with a dagger, dealing those 3 points of damage, take it as an offense that this goblin, this lowly thing, would end up daring to scratch you, daring to think that it was on your level. Now you got a little bit of interest. Especially when you start raising your voice and describing how you run it through, and putting the blade right through its heart, and you feel steel grinding up against spine. Which leads us into our third bit. Describe, describe, describe. This falls for GMs. This also falls for players. GMs, personal note, if at any point your player has gained the finishing blow on any particular character or any particular NPC, be it a goblin or the archmage, let them describe what they're doing. Not just lopping his head off. Let them get into it. Right? Now, if he just says, I decapitate the son of a bitch, it's a good start. It's a start. It's far better than saying I rolled 12 damage. Let them get into it. Let them get into the meat of it. And that's not just for combat. That could be describing the entrance to a great kingdom where if you look up, the gate seems to go on forever, high enough to touch the clouds. The walls are so immense, if they ever fell, they threaten to flatten the city themselves. Make the impossible and the impractical. Make it bigger than life. When you get into the fight, get it into the gritty and gory. When you talk to royalty, explain that bit of regalness that follows them wherever they go. Change your speech, do whatever you need to, but just start to describe things. If your character, don't just describe that you're walking around with a steel shield and longsword. Now, if that's your thing, tell me about that longsword. Tell me on how it has the etchings along the guard from previous battles. Tell me on how this was handed down to you from your grandfather, and that this is a point of pride in your family. Tell me that your shield has the family crest, or that it is tapered with trophies of previous conquests. Let me feel on who this character is, and after all, the clothes make the man, or the woman. Speaking of conquests, make conflict matter. Now, I'm pretty sure we've all been there at some point where we get to go up against the big red dragon or something like that, and we started off crawling inside a dungeon, which started off with a bunch of rats. Somehow some gnolls were in there, a few zombies, and then somehow there is a dragon lurking in a chamber that is just almost big enough for it. Okay, but what do these things have in common? The conflict in any way should matter. Make it a tribe of goblins. There's a lot you can do with goblins. Just one race can end up fulfilling your range, your support, your up close and personal. Trust me, if you end up thinking that a goblin is completely helpless, slap a couple of levels of rogue and fighter on that, and watch on how bad it gets when they start to swarming the party. But it doesn't have to just be conflict, or it doesn't have to just be combat, pardon. Try and imagine dealing with the king, and the king has just sent 5 of his legionnaires to be executed, just on the point of believing that they might be treasonous. No evidence, but all of a sudden, the king we're working for, that goodly king, he's paranoid, deathly so, and he commands power. He can have us snuffed out in an instant. What are we going to do about this? What's going to happen when that paladin you guys been rolling with sees this as an injustice and says, this king cannot stand? Oh, are you going to go up against the king that you've been helping for the past 3, 4 sessions? Or are you going to try and talk the paladin down? Maybe show him that he is under a delusion that anyone with power would happen to be good. After all, power corrupts. That goes a little bit back to make it personal, right? And if you can ever balance make it personal with making conflict matter, because they can go hand in hand. In fact, they support each other quite nicely. You have the chance to make that story something they want to talk about, something they want to push forward. Last little bit. This is your first taking steps into trying to bring immersion into your game. Keep it simple, but let that simplicity grow. Much like the paladin and the paranoid king, they're both very simple concepts to play. But just because of the personality types, you can build up the conflict. And the conflict, when it matters, suddenly becomes very complicated. So don't think that you need to end up writing an entire world filled with NPCs and that are all just cookie cutter and just going about because, after all, Rick the blacksmith, there's only so many lines of dialogue he really needs to be in. But if Rick the blacksmith also happens to be a failed wizard at the academy who builds cursed magic items to set to adventurers just to show them what for, so these items would fail them while they're in the mines not too far off, he knows, that are infested with ghouls. Just so this way he can feel a little bit of comeuppance. Well, now you got something a little bit interesting. There you have it. Remember going over it. This is your first steps. Don't make make personalities, not character sheets. Your numbers should represent what your character is. Your number should not tell you what your personality is. Make it personal. Find a reason to actually care. When you're writing a character, make sure that somewhere in their backstory you show what they actually do care about. And try not to make it too superficial, something like greed. I want money. Money is just a point to get something else. What do you want? What do you really want when it comes down to that greed? Respect? Power? Authority? Yeah, you can start exploring that a little bit. And then all of a sudden, when that 100 gold pieces comes down, you end up realizing that, how do I take that 100 gold pieces and really make it worth my while? Describe. Describe, because those descriptions are what fill in the imagination and let it really take off. And it brings the personality, it brings the flavor, it brings the dread, it brings the weight of what's happening to the table, and in a way that 100 net damage cannot. The conflict, make it matter, and suddenly the characters aren't going, or the players aren't going to be sitting around your table looking at their phones, playing a simple iOS game or checking their Facebook. They're going to be sitting upright in attention, going, "Oh, this is getting good. What's going to happen next? How's it growing?" And lastly, let simplicity grow. Overcomplication that serves no purpose is useless. But something that's well crafted and simple can grow into something really out there. Could be as simple as a personality quirk of you just don't trust dwarves. Or maybe it's a case of royalty is very difficult to trust. Maybe it's a case of you are dedicated truly to your country. Take something simple and run with it. As an asterisk to that last bit, when you build a character, try and make sure that they can interact with other people. If you're that lone wolf who doesn't like anybody and stays in the woods, I can almost guarantee you that person would never end up leaving their woods in order to end up adventuring with a party. So unless you have a good loophole that ends up saying this is why he's with the group, you might want to reconsider. Make him a little bit more personable. Anyway, remember your path. And end up taking prayers in the morning when you end up seeing the sun first glimpse over the horizon. When you end up having that one time for prayer, your ancestors will smile on you. And then maybe their bones walk with you. Until then, enjoy your life. After all, it is fleeting.